My name is Margarita Berta Avila, and I'm a tenure-line faculty professor at Sacramento State University in the College of Education. And I've dedicated myself for the last 20 years or so in preparing students who want to be high school teachers. Long introductions and or educational journeys is definitely an opportunity to begin to build community with your students. It's an experience that allows you to break down the barriers that often exist amongst students and teachers with respects to how we position ourselves, how we view one another, and then already the images that we are perceiving about who is in front of us, whether it's students to teacher or teacher to students. So the long introductions educational journey is really an opportunity to tear all those walls down and to really go deep into what has brought us to the point of where we are right now. What it also does, though, is that the long introductions allows us to really highlight the experiences that have impacted our lives and our trajectory. Experiences grounded in family, culture, community, but also experiences that are grounded in institutionalized racism, white supremacy, sexism, linguicism, a lot of the different experiences and intersectionalities that we engage in as communities. And so by sharing our stories and our narratives, we are able to name our experience at an individual level. But then as we go through, let's say, particular courses that students and educators are engaged in. For example, I teach the anti-racism social justice classes at Sacramento State. Then I'm able to connect the personal narratives to the larger macro societal issues that exist. And I think oftentimes what happens in our own individual analysis is that we believe our stories, and it is true, they're specific to us, they're specific to our experience, but at the same time, they do correlate to the infrastructures that are in place that influenced what those realities and experiences looked like. And I think that's what's really key to long introductions. It helps build that community. It breaks down those ways in which we are positioning each other or even sizing each other up when we enter a class. But then at the same time, it allows us then to take the next step to offer a critical analysis of why our experiences existed and occurred in the way in which they did. In the students sharing their long introductions, then they are centering. What that does is that it fosters an environment in which the educator, the students, the environment itself, the ecosystem that is being developed centers the narratives and the stories of the students in that class. And so from that point on, what you develop as an educator has to flow and integrate through the realities and centering of the experiences of the students. So the idea is not that long introductions, educational journeys just becomes a checkoff of, now we shared our story, so we're done, but now we're going to go back to a traditional, oppressive, Western framed, hegemonic pedagogy, right? The idea is then to decenter that, which has always been traditional, and center and lay as the foundation the realities and experiences of who the students are. At the same time, I think often what the mistake is that educators exclude themselves from being part of the community. They see themselves as, okay, I'm going to build community, but it's going to be the students building community. But in reality, you as well are part of that ecosystem. You as well are part of that reciprocal learning of students giving to each other and and you vice versa to students and to the, I'm sorry, my hand was in the way, to students and to yourself and the classroom environment. And so what's key as well is that when you are sharing your story, that you also share your story. That is key, that you model your narrative in highlighting what has been the experiences that have influenced you, positive, and experiences that were that came of hardship, that was difficult, that integrated and got you to the point of how you got yourself or where you are now. And so I think what, for an educator, most importantly, the long introductions educational journey displaces the notion of hierarchy and your role of how teachers are often seen. And because you're giving your narrative at that moment based obviously on what you feel comfortable with at that moment to give, right? Because for me personally, my narrative changes every single time I give a long introduction, depending on what I'm feeling, what I'm going through that day. But it definitely puts you in a vulnerable position, which is often what educators don't want to put themselves in, right? To put themselves in a vulnerable position and say, I'm here with you, and what I ask of you, I'm going to ask of myself. And so that then begins to also build the trust that cannot just be gained because you're in front of the classroom, right? But because you were able to be vulnerable, right? Then it frames you from the student's end with a lens of, through a lens of humanity. I think what's important, I mean, especially if the instructors are primarily white and you have students of color, particularly brown and black students in your class, I think it's critical not to evade the discussion of race and racism, right? And not to then try to evade it with other isms, right? And I say that because institutionalized race and racism is one of the hardest areas to speak to, but that will be one of the areas that will be most prevalent often in the experiences of the students and what they share, right? And so the US context has a tendency to be very fragile around that, right? And to want to then to ignore that discussion or then couple it with other items. And so I think the advice that is important is for white educators to continue to be open to reading and learning more about anti-racism, learning more about their own internal racism and how they can confront that. Because if they don't begin to grapple with that, then it will emerge in the context of the discussion, and consciously or unconsciously, they will shut it down because there's a natural socialization of defensiveness that happens with white teachers. Unless a teacher has already begun a process of being a co-conspirator with students of color and faculty of color, et cetera, then that might be a different case. But if they have not, then it's going to be critical, because the long introduction educational journey, yes, it's a community builder. It gives us an opportunity to really counter what we might have perceived of the individuals around us. But it's also, like I shared, a tool to really get to naming the macro systemic racist inequitable structures that exist in correlation to our realities, and be able to unpack that, analyze that, and then eventually decolonize that, right? And so if that work, which often has to happen simultaneously, right, isn't done, then that's going to be difficult. And so having collective dialogues and discussions with other peer educators is going to be important.
Welcome to Statistics 300. My name is Carla Patricia Lanzas Rojas, and I will be your mathematics professor this semester. Yes, that is my legal name. I do have a legally forename, as is customary in the Latinx culture. And so today, what I want to do is I want to give you an introduction to me, how I really got here, my educational journey, but also I'm hoping that this presentation serves as a reason why community is so important, not just to me, but as part of this class. So I'm starting off here with a quote by Isaac Newton. It says, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And if we think of elevation, the higher you are, the further you can see, right? But if we're standing on the ground, right, we can't see as far as if being on the shoulders of actual giants. So the fact that I'm here today is because I was able to stand on quite a few giants. And I want you to meet those giants today. Today we're here at Sacramento City College, and again, I am an assistant mathematics and statistics professor, and many people see me as just that, as just a professor. They don't realize that I graduated with a master's in mathematics from San Francisco State, but prior to that, I went to UC Davis, and I actually minored in education with my bachelor's of science in mathematics. But before all of that, I started off at Los Marinos Community College, just where you are today. And although I really wanted to go to a 4-year right after high school, the reality was I just didn't have the funds. And I didn't have the support needed at home to be able to navigate the system. But through my journey, I was able to find these amazing professional giants that helped me come where I am today. I'm going to start off with Dr. Ruben Spake. He's the one on the top left. And he was my calculus professor through all 3 calc classes I took at Los Marinos Community College. At the end of my last semester, he urged me to highly consider switching my major from child development to mathematics. And he highly encouraged me to attend UC Davis. The thing that was phenomenal about Professor Ruben Spake is that when I attended his class, right, he saw something in me that I personally did not. And he was a phenomenal professor, even though he had an extreme severe speech impediment. And so again, just showing me that obstacles are just obstacles. We can overcome them all. Dr. Jesus de Loera, up until this day, is my mentor, right? He is Mexican-American. And many times when I went to UC Davis, people told me, not only are you going to be the only female in your classes, you're going to be the only person of color in your classes. And I walked into UC Davis having Dr. Jesus de Loera being one of my first professors in mathematics. He became my mentor and my research advisor. I wrote my first thesis under him. And up until this day, we still talk. And he is now leading the Chicano and Latino Engineering and Scientist Society, which I was a part of when I was at UC Davis. Dr. Fabiola Manjares was exceptional. She was one of the first professors I had that not only was Latina, she was phenomenal. She graduated from La Universidad de Mexico, and then she did her post-bac at UC Davis and is now teaching. And she introduced me to the world of knot theory, which is phenomenal. We can talk about that. And then lastly, Dr. Judy Kish, who's at the very bottom, was a professor at San Francisco State University. And she does a lot of research in mathematics education and really tries to push for active learning. And on top of active learning, she's really trying to push for having students investigate and solve problems rather than being told how to do them. I worked under her and I did my thesis work with her, and she's been phenomenal. And because of these 4 people who actually truly believed in the greatness that I had, I am standing before you here today. But prior to even getting to college, right, it's so important to make sure that our community is there to support us, right? And that's where my familia comes in. This picture here where it says all of my familia, right? This is my entire familia here that I have in the US. This is it. This is my core system. And even besides, my distant cousins and my tias, right? Here's my main familia, my 2 parents and my 2 younger sisters. I'm the oldest of three, right? And I was one of the first in my entire family to graduate from higher education, right? And because both my parents worked three jobs while I was in elementary and middle school, right? I knew that I could and, could achieve something greater. I was born in Nicaragua, in Jinotega, Nicaragua, up by the mountains. Nicaragua is located in Central America, right? And it has one of the largest lakes in Central America, and is the only place in the entire world that has freshwater sharks, which I think is one of the coolest facts ever. Unfortunately, when I was born, there was a lot of turmoil, and there was the Iran-Contra War, if you remember your history, right? Which happened in the late 80s. My father was drafted to be part of the Sandinistas, and that whole fiasco, right, was one of the biggest reasons why my dad fled the country. The Sandinistas were portraying, that they were there to help the people. And one of the biggest things that my father saw was that they were lying to the people and predominantly lying to the children of Nicaragua. And my dad went up to my grandfather one day and said, I cannot raise my daughter in this world. And he asked my grandfather, and my mother's dad asked my grandfather, how do you feel about me taking my wife and my daughter to the US? And my grandfather responded to him and told him, that is your choice because you will know what is best to do with your family. That was the last time my father saw my grandfather. He left Nicaragua in 1987 and arrived in the US about 8 months later. My mom and I then were tasked to stay in Nicaragua for a whole year. So I didn't know my father the first few years that I was born. At 2.5 years old is when my mother and I made the journey. So I didn't cross one border. I crossed many. I had to cross Honduras and Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico, right? And I did all of this with my mother. I left when I was 2.5 years old. My mom tells me that when we left, I was wearing a light blue dress because I was dressed to impress. But when I finally made it to the US, about 11 months later, my dress was torn, brown, and fully soiled. I think about what my mother went through when I went through, when she did this with me, now having a daughter. And I can't fathom the strength that she had to have had to see all of the things that happened and that we continue to see in today's day. When we were crossing the border in Mexico, we were detained, and the coyote told my mom at gunpoint that she had to pretend to be his wife. And even with all of that, it's very easy to identify when you are not Mexican American, you don't speak the language, your accent is totally different, you just don't belong. And we were incarcerated. My mother and I were incarcerated for about a month, and in there they did not feed us, and I was constantly crying. My mom retells the story of me drinking dirty water from the puddles of the floor, and thinking about this as, someone who now has a daughter, I can't even think of the heartache from a mother's perspective. Well, I cried so much, and the guards just couldn't take it anymore, so they let us go. They kept telling her to, make me shut up, and she couldn't. I was hungry and I was tired and I was thirsty, and so they let us go. My family then hired another coyote to get us through the Rio Grande. And when we were going through the Rio, they put my mom on a tire. And so my mom was on a tire and they were pushing her forward through the tire. I was on her shoulders. And when we were crossing the river, a strong current came and took me off my mother's shoulders, and I was now floating downstream all by myself. My mom looks back at me and cries out, "Mija!" And the coyote says, "Forget it. Consider her dead. We got to keep going." Luckily, there were some good Samaritans down the river who saw me and caught me and then threw me across the river. And my mom retells the story as letting me know that right there, she said you looked like a ball going across the river. And she could have, if I hadn't drowned, she thought that the pure impact of me being thrown to the other side of the river would have killed me. So my mom grabbed me by my legs and dangled me once she got to the other side and kept screaming at me until I started breathing again. Now she jokes and says, "Well, Carla, maybe you would have been a little bit smarter had you not gotten thrown to the other side of the river." Today, I stand here before you as a US citizen. It took a long time to get here. I was undocumented until the age of 12. And at the age of 12, my parents fought really hard, and we were very lucky because at the time we lived in Southern Florida where legislation helped us get proper paperwork. I became a US citizen at the age of 18 because I was now considered an adult. When my mother, I no longer depended on my parents to be US citizens. I myself went in and got the test done. So I went through all the measures, and today I am a naturalized US citizen. I tell you all of this not because it's a drastic story, but it's because I know that it resembles many of my students today. I tell you this because I could have said myself many times, I don't deserve to be here. And I have said that. And I could have quit because statistics, because of really everything, so many people telling me that I don't belong. But now, because of my parents and everything that they've strived for, because of professors and other teachers told me to continue, I was able to stand on their shoulders to see further than what my parents could have even imagined. Today, everything that I do is for these two kids here, because now they can stand on my shoulders and they can see the horizon further than I can ever imagine. So I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about the shoulders that you currently stand on. Think about how far you can see. And now I want you to start thinking, who can stand on your shoulders? Who are you going to allow to climb up to your shoulders and see further than you? This class is about community, because there is no way any of us got anywhere where we are today if it were not for someone who helped us. We are humans, and when we are born, we are so dependent on others. So for us to think that we can get anywhere on ourselves is very selfish. I want you to go through this class, and I want you to think about how can you help your classmates understand what you understand, and how can we as a class be successful this semester.
It is absolutely life-changing with respect to how the collective in the environment that is being fostered engages with one another. There's a sense of compassion and empathy, and no longer, at least this has been my experience, can an educator look at the students in front of them as a number of their student ID, 04556, whatever the number is, right? No longer can they view their students in that way because they know their life. These students have shared their way of being, their sense of breath, their sense of living, their sense of spirit with you, and you hopefully honestly with them. And so in doing so, you're not just either student or educator showing up to the classroom just to show up, right? You're there because you're invested now with one another. And the educational journey long introductions helps build that foundation that then is incumbent upon everyone there to continue to build throughout the academic year and even beyond.